Hello, everyone. We know the last thing you need is another fitness podcast to catch you up on the newest trends, fad diets that are based on popular opinions, not research. Enter myself, Marianna. We make Fitness Stuff podcast to make exercise and nutrition science practical. Our goal is to expose misinformation in the industry by providing only evidence-based education, where today we're talking about fish oil and omega-3. One of Marianna's hidden talents, going into this apparently she's an expert. We've written many articles, but she's going to take us through. But before we get started, as a friendly reminder, this show is free. It always will be. It's a part of our mission to bring zero cost to consumer education to as many people as we possibly can. So we like to remind you guys, the easiest way you can support this podcast, other than just sharing it on social media, would be to rate it 5 stars on whatever platform you are consuming it on. If it's YouTube, Spotify, Apple, you have zero clue how much that impacts the show and allows us to reach more people. So we thank you, everyone who's already done it, which has been a ton of overwhelming support. Thank you. Now let's get into it. The nitty gritty. First of all, Marianna, how are you today?
I'm doing lovely. Actually energized this week, unlike my friend Tony over here. I did not go to a festival for the past however many days. How many days was that, Lollapalooza?
It was 4
4 days. Yeah. I was resting this weekend, brushing up on the research on omega-3s and fish oil. I'm ready to go. I'm feeling good.
She's getting good night's sleep. She's going to carry the energy for the episode today. And it's actually late there in the afternoon. This is right. You're feeling good late.
It's 3 for me, noon for you.
It just pumps you up. Fish oil just pumps you up. It gets Marianna. It's those passion topics. It's like, for me, Machine Gun Kelly. You tell me, we talk about it, I get energetic. Same thing for fish oil and Marianna. She just gets
same exact thing.
She just gets freaking hype.
Ask me if I want to have a conversation with Machine Gun Kelly or talk to you about the benefits of omega-3s.
And I think we know the answer. She's like, Machine Gun, get the freak out of here. Okay. Tell us real quick what we're going to talk about today in fish oil. Because like I was saying before, on the surface, this might not look like the most exciting episode, but I think after this outline, after what you're going to take us through, especially with your background, looking through it, diving through the research, I think this might be one of my favorites. So amazing. What are we talking about today?
So today we're going to run through what fish oil even is, and we're going to talk about omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, which, brief snippet, fish oil is extremely high in omega-3s. So we're going to talk about the role of each of them in the body, where you can get each of these from your diet. We're also going to dive deep into supplementing with fish oil, the research out there on its health benefits, why it's so important to include omega-3s in your diet, and then differentiate, briefly touch on where you get omega-6s and what a lot of misinformation is out there in terms of their reputation for their effects on health, and how each of these essential fatty acids plays a really huge role in just your overall health in general. So we're going to be really diving deep. I'm so excited. We're
going through all of it. I think people know omega-3s. People know fish oil is good. People know it's good, but they don't know why. They don't know what it actually does. They just hear it's good for heart health, so you should take it. But they don't know how much. They don't know what to look for, what's important on a label. They don't know what it does. So do we want to start with, I know we're talking about omega-3s and omega-6s, but since we're going to revolve it around omega-3s, which like fish oil is how most people hear of those. What is fish oil exactly?
Yeah. So I even think a better question is, what does it contain? Which is what makes it so glorified and so popular. So fish oil contains primarily omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids. You probably hear often as well, eat your omega-3s. Omega-3s are good for you. They're good for heart health, but why is that? And we'll get into that later, but they contain 2 different types of omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA. I'm not going to say the long names, but that's what I'll refer to those a lot throughout the episode so that you have those up front. And EPA and DHA regulate many biological processes in the body, such as inflammation, metabolic signaling, brain function. So our body can't make them on our own. You must get their essential. You must get them from the diet, which is why, because of their function, because of their role, it makes them so, so crucial to your overall health.
Seriously. So if it's involved in so many, pretty much every bodily process, but we don't make it on our own. It's so essential, but we just don't make it ourselves. We have to consume it through our diet. That's weird.
Yeah. Yeah. So there are polyunsaturated fatty acids they're named so because of their structure, which I won't go too far down a rabbit hole. But omega-6s and omega-3s are the only two types of fatty acids that the human body can't produce. So that's why they receive so much attention, especially when it comes to dietary interventions, because that's the only way you can get it.
I have a follow-up question that might sound stupid.
No stupid questions.
This is why I'm the perfect observer for this conversation. So if your body can't make it, what would happen if you just didn't eat them? If you didn't get them through your diet?
If you got virtually none.
Got zero. What if you got zero from your diet? Which I know, like, through everything, it'd probably be next to impossible to get zero. But what if you did?
Yeah.
What
Completely.
if I just didn't have it for like 6 months?
I mean, there's obviously no research on that because that would be unethical.
Yeah.
But there is a lot of research because it affects brain development. And there's a lot of research on mothers who are pregnant and deficient in omega-3s and then how that affects the development of brains in infants. And it significantly impairs brain development because that's one of omega-3 and omega-6's main roles is in brain function, in the cell walls of your cell membranes in the brain. And that's one of its primary functions, especially as you develop. So it can impair development and lead to, there's a bit of research out there too about how it can affect people with ADHD if you're deficient in omega-3s. There's an association there. There's not a lot out there yet. But in terms of if you were completely depleted, I mean, the functions that they're essential for would slowly start to shut down.
Since they're involved somewhat in every bodily function, it would probably just be getting less and less efficient, and more things would start just so it'd probably be essentially impossible to go long enough without consuming them to see what would even happen down to zero, because your body would just start turning off certain functions or getting worse at certain functions until just like day-to-day life would just not be doable.
They're important. They're a key part of the structure in every cell wall that you have. So if you didn't have that, any of those functions of those cells would be impaired.
It's every cell in your body, right? The cell membrane, the cell wall.
Yeah. So when you think about, this is a little bit of biochemistry, but unsaturated fat. So fats have a little head and they have a tail. So if you think about the tail part, unsaturated ones have 2 or more double bonds. The double bond creates a kink in that tail. So think of like a zigzag. That zigzag is really important in cell walls because it allows those walls to be fluid. It allows for movement between cells and throughout cells. And when you think of comparing that to a trans fat, again, structure determines function. A trans fat does not have any double bonds, so it has a straight tail. It has no kinks. So that's why when you think of butter, which is mostly trans fat, it's solid. And then oil is liquid. That is because of those tails. That is because of the movement. So think of those also position themselves in our cell walls. So when you eat a high trans fat diet, there's not much movement in those cell walls. It prevents a lot of blood flow. It contributes to plaque formation and high blood pressure. So you think about it that way, a little analogy there. When you think about their structure, it can really help you understand, oh, wow, this is also, this is how the structure looks like of a food, of a butter. It's stiff. Let's think about our cell membrane. Yeah.
That helps a lot. I'm even thinking now to the analogy of like you've seen people on YouTube or whatever, if it's professors, whatever, they'll fill up like a mason jar full of like marbles. And you'd be like, oh, is this full? And everyone's like, yeah, it's full. But then they pour it with like water and it fills in so much more. I'm thinking of like a marble. It's not fluid. It doesn't just move smoothly through whatever it's going through. Liquid can move smoothly and go wherever it needs to go. That like fluidity in these oils helps things run smoother without getting clogged up, stuck up. And it just makes things move smooth. Yeah?
Yeah. And that's the reason going even a little bit more deeper here, because of those double bonds, you have a free hydrogen atom. So I'm not going to go down a rabbit hole here. But when you have a free hydrogen atom, it wants to react. It wants to move around that tail. It wants to attach to something. That makes these fats, polyunsaturated, very prone to oxidation, or when you think about an oil going rancid. So that's why oils are in dark bottles, because when they're exposed to light and they have to be in like a neutral temperature, they go rancid super, super fast. And it's been hypothesized that this same process, so when we're talking about omega-6s, they're more prone to oxidation than omega-3s. It's been hypothesized that that same process of going rancid in the oil also happens in our cells if we have too much of it. And that promotes oxidation, which promotes inflammation. And that it's this hypothesis. Oh, I forget the name of it right now. But that's a hypothesis that has been
that omega-6 that happens
debunked.
a lot. Oh, okay. So now I have a silly question that might be a tangent a little bit. So it changes, and that's why it needs to be protected. I know I've thought about this, but I've never actually looked into it. Does cooking with certain oils make that happen to the oil through the cooking process?
Have you ever heard of high heat oils?
Yeah. I've just never thought
That's
about
why
the
there are
why,
high
the
heat
what,
oils. So go any like a food going rancid, especially oils, if you expose it to light, heat. So that's why like proper packaging is so important.
Dang.
And you learn a lot about this. Like dietitians, I remember when I was on track to be a dietitian, one of my whole courses was on food preservation and why that's so important, because the stability of certain foods. So like vegetable oils are very they're unstable, but so is olive oil. Olive oil is very unstable. But then there's certain oils that can be taken to a higher temperature before they go rancid. So like an avocado oil, or you think of like a canola oil, which you fry in. So because they can be taken into a much higher temperature, it's better for these foods.
So I'm thinking now, omega-3, when I think of where I get omega-3, salmon's the first thing that pops up, right? Omega, like fish oil, I think of salmon. And although you can get them in quite a few other places, I think of salmon. So would cooking salmon change the structure of those omega-3s in the salmon? Or how you cook it or how you prepare it?
Heat is going to alter, like cooking any food alters the structure of it a little bit. And you see that in terms of like the color changes and the taste and how all of that happens. So it is going to adjust the structure. It doesn't mean it like the heat doesn't.
Okay, but that's what I was like. It doesn't
get rid of
no
the
way you could like cook a salmon at like a stupid high temperature to where it's like, oh, the omega-3s that you're getting from this food just aren't doing it. Okay,
No.
that's what I was getting. I was like, wait a second, I've never taken this so far.
Yeah.
So
No.
that makes sense.
Say olive oil, for instance. It can't be taken to a high temperature. Like it can't. That's the fascinating thing about like food science. You can't take it to as high of a temperature as you could canola oil. So you don't want to fry anything in olive oil.
That's interesting.
It just won't fry the food because the oil can't be taken that high.
That's not have a follow-up question. So you said, and this is when we was okay, what is omega-3s? Omega-3s, what we look for them in is EPA and DHA, that's what makes up omega-3s. So I have a question now, because I know we were talking about this before.
Those are the two primary forms.
When I look on the supplement bottle, it lists omega-3 total, and then it says EPA, DHA content.
Yep.
When I'm consuming omega-3s through food, do different foods contain different amounts of EPA versus DHA? And I know this might be a little bit later, so we could always reel that back, but that question just popped in my head.
Yeah, there are different percentages of omega-3s in different foods, but that's almost like getting, you know how we talk about the nitty-gritty of fat loss?
Like the small things.
I didn't even bring that. That's like a small detail. It matters, which we'll talk about later. It matters for supplements, but foods high in omega-3s, unless if you have like when you get into people who may have like heart conditions or risk factors for cardiovascular disease, it may matter more and be more beneficial, but for the average person, which foods are high in omega-3s in general, that's the most important part because, and I was telling Tony about this earlier, the majority of Americans do not eat enough omega-3 fatty acids because they are not readily available in the standard American diet. The foods that they're high in are not found in the standard American diet.
Okay, so they're not. So I was going to say with this one, because we'll talk about supplementation and things like that later. What would this be a good time to go through the foods where you find them, just as like to wrap it like the what is omega-3s? Like where do you find omega-3s outside of my brain? I'm thinking literally the two things that pop in my head are salmon and chia seeds. Those are the two things I know people talk about all the freaking time. Where else do you find omega-3s?
Yeah. So you also find you find them in all fatty fishes. So think of, like you said, salmon, herring, mackerel are some examples. So any fatty fish like that. Chia seeds, yes. Walnuts, super high in walnuts, super high in flax seeds. So then you get into like flax oil, very high in omega-3s. And certain vegetable oils will also have omega-3s in them, but they're primarily omega-6s. But like soybean oil has some omega-3s, but when you're really thinking about the high omega-3 content, think about fatty fish, think about chia seeds, walnuts, flax oil. And most nuts have them, but the most considerable amount are like found in walnuts.
Now I'm thinking you're saying most Americans are low or not getting their intake for omega-3s. No freaking wonder, because those foods, even myself, like I'll eat salmon probably once or twice a week just because I usually buy a big frozen filet from like Costco and I'll portion it out. I don't really eat a ton of nuts. I do have omega-3 or chia seeds about once a day, but that's also me having those foods probably more than I think most people I know. So I'm like, it's no wonder most people are not getting enough omega-3s in their diet. It's because those foods, especially the good quality foods with them, aren't normal staples in people's diets.
There's also ALA, which is alpha linoleic acid, which I don't talk about much here because in terms of the context that we are talking about, in terms of fish oil, its effect on heart health is mainly EPA and DHA, but there's also ALA, which is another omega-3, and that is primarily found in plant oils. But our bodies can convert it to EPA and DHA, which is why but like the fatty fishes, like walnuts, chia seeds, primarily EPA and DHA.
Okay. Now I'm getting scared. I'm like, do I eat enough omega-3s through my day? And I'm thinking not. So that's what it is. We now know it has a function in the cell wall or the cell membrane in every cell in our entire bodies. It's pretty important. So answer this because I might not even be asking the right question. What are the negative implications you see of not having a diet or a high enough omega-3 intake? Or what are the positives you seem to see when you do get adequate amount? Which one of those questions would be probably better to ask?
I think it's better to talk about the benefits of omega-3s and the role that they play in just human health in general, and how that can really puts into perspective like why it is so important to get these in your diet, or if the only way you can do it is from a supplement. So brief summary, they play a critical role in heart health, and a lot of that comes from their anti-inflammatory effects, their ability to lower triglyceride levels. A lot of people with risk factors for cardiovascular disease are prescribed a fish oil supplement. That is very, very common. If you have high blood pressure or you have high triglycerides, low HDL, these are all markers, blood biomarkers that you look at to determine if you're at risk for heart disease.
And they prescribe fish oil for that.
Yeah.
Dang, I didn't know that. I know it's good for heart health, and that's what you always hear, but I didn't know that was something that was being prescribed.
So this is just a personal example. I remember the first time I was introduced to fish oil, I was super, super young because my dad has AFib. He has a heart condition, and he took fish oil all the time. And I was like, they come in like pretty big pills.
They're always the cool looking pill. Every other vitamin mineral is like just a white little pill. This one's like a cool, clear little like yellowy, like what is it? Especially as a kid.
Yeah. And he doesn't anymore, but at the time he was taking cholesterol lowering drugs. So like it's it's not just alone. Like it's not like a treatment. Like if you have high cholesterol, high blood pressure.
I mean, what I'm impressed with that is usually, I guess I'm more familiar with the American healthcare system, is I'm, I guess, a little more unfamiliar with, I didn't think they would prescribe things like that. I know we were talking on a previous
Yeah.
episode, like different countries and even America now, like prescribing walks in nature in coordination with a few other things. I just feel like that was uncommon. America is more of a just take this medication to help bring things down, not the whole preventative piece, which this seems like, which I think is pretty cool.
You're not going to get that everywhere.
Yeah.
So, like, I'm not saying that that means every single doctor is going to go say, hey, like, maybe we should look at, are you getting enough in your diet? Like, maybe you should take a fish oil supplement. That's more how my dad was, like, prescribed fish oil. That's definitely more on the rare side. But it is a common practice used. And also it depends, like, that's why it's so important to work with your practitioner, because it depends on so many factors, so many things you have going on. This could give you the extra push to help improve your blood biomarkers related to heart health. So that's what that's what fish oil is mainly known for, and omega-3s for improving risk factors for heart disease, promoting heart health. And I'll give a brief outline of other things that we'll talk about. We'll talk about its role in inflammation. It also plays a role in depression, which is really fascinating. This is on the newer side. There's still a lot of research, but this is something that is evolving. And then it's also really important for pregnant, lactating women, infants. So like it plays a really huge role in fetal development.
Okay, so it's not, so you hear
kind of
take
like
fish oil for heart health, but now it's expanding past that, whatever its roles in inflammation and what secondary and third order consequence things does that lead to, starting to play a role, like looking like it has something to do with, it makes sense in depression a little bit. If it is helping or hurting, getting in the way of things working more or less efficiently in your body and in every cell, it's like, why would that not translate to mental health and just physical health?
Yeah.
It really does reach everything. That's super freaking cool.
What I find so fascinating, my area of study was in biochemistry. This is what it is. Nutritional biochemistry looks at all of the nitty-gritty part of this. So like the function of a lipid, like how that impacts your blood biomarkers, like on a very like small, detailed scale, like analyzing that function. Like we know the role that omega-3s play in the diet. Okay, because they play such a huge role in the inflammatory process, in brain development, in heart health, we know that. We can look at that under a microscope. How can we extend that out to study it in terms of how it can affect population health? Like how it can affect health outcomes? Okay, we're going to go look at omega-3 intake in the US across different populations. Look at, oh wow, overall, it's generally low. Could this play a role in heart disease? Okay, let's study that. Okay, now we're going to stop observing groups. We're going to do a randomized controlled trial. That's how it all evolves. So like a lot of my specialty when getting my master's, like it's on the very like narrow scale of understanding like what does this do in the body? So how could this potentially impact our health? So that's how all of these studies came to be, because of the function of omega-3s, what they do. So I just think that's so cool. Before we have anything, it's some group of researchers or multiple researchers were like, hey, these are super important. We can only get them from our diet. Let's pick up on some patterns and see what we notice so we can get funding for randomized controlled trials.
It makes sense though, just with how it evolves, because your health is so like every facet of your health is so interdependent, where it's like it's not just one thing does this. We might start to notice, groups that have lower overall omega-3 intakes, it's like that could impact hundreds of thousands of different processes, which could impact hundreds of thousands of other, like it just, there's levels and levels and levels to it. So it makes sense where it has to start very broad, and then you have to kind of cut off a piece of pie. Let's start looking in this direction. Okay, let's take it a step further here to find the dead ends, to find what's actually kind of sticking, because there's so many different possibilities with it.
This is why we will make a whole other video on seed oils, canola oil, the inflammatory oils, that if you've maybe seen this come up on social media, people talk about it a lot. That's a whole other video. But one of the reasons why I get so frustrated, researchers, dietitian professionals in the space get so frustrated with that, is because it is well known that so vegetable oils are high in omega-6s. You don't have to change your omega-6 intake at all. if you increase your omega-3 intake, you will see significant health benefits from that without changing consumption of these omega-6s, which are high in vegetable oils. And that's the conversation not being had, is promoting eating more omega-3s. These are inflammatory.
Yeah, the focus is, omega-6, a lot of these omega-6 oils that we're now seeing more and more in the everyday diet, it's causing inflammation, which is leading to disease. Stop talking about taking these down, because you can leave those wherever you want to, is what you're saying. As long as your omega-3s are high enough, because that's what I was talking about before the episode. I'm like, is there some sort of ratio between omega-3 to omega-6? And like, there's no real ratio. If you're having a higher omega-6 diet, would it make sense in theory to just have a higher omega-3 intake? And maybe if omega-6 is lower, it would make sense to not need as high? That might be reaching a little bit.
To keep it, there's no set standard for this optimal ratio of omega-3 to omega-6. There is almost like, yes, consume more omega-3s and watch your consumption of ultra-processed foods, because vegetable oils are found in ultra-processed foods. And over time, as nutrition science evolved, preliminary research was, oh my God, these seed oils are inflammatory. Yeah. They are causing all of these poor health outcomes. But then we're like, oh, wait, no, these seed oils are a huge part of the standard American diet, which is ultra-processed foods, which also are high in sugar. The standard American diet has low whole grain, fruit, vegetable consumption, low antioxidant consumption, fiber consumption, low sedentary lifestyle. So looking at a lot of that epidemiology research, we were like, okay, it's these dietary and lifestyle patterns as a whole that are contributing to the inflammation, the disease. It's not the omega-6 oils causing this. So let's not focus too much on that. Let's improve our dietary patterns by adding in more omega-3s. Okay, maybe by improving our patterns, that will lower omega-6 intake.
So you're saying the videos naturally that pop up every 6 videos on my Instagram or TikTok feed with a shirtless guy in the freaking stores holding vegetable
in the grocery
oil
store?
Saying, this is killing you. Do not ever touch, like, all those oils and stuff like that. It's like, maybe, okay.
Carb MD. He also says vegetables are killing you. It's fine.
I'd love to have an episode just tearing him apart. But let's focus on this. I think it's a common trend right now is like to fear oils, to fear those vegetable oils, to fear those things.
Yeah.
But it makes a lot of sense. A lot of things like where those fear-based things come from. Because if you look at the first order of what's happening, it's like, oh, that's kind of scary. But let's look at the underlying root cause. And it's hardly ever that scary. Yeah. It's hardly ever the thing that it is on the surface. So that's what surprised me.
And it's the overconsumption. Too much of anything is not good for you. And that's the whole thing. I'm not saying canola oil is like better for you than olive oil. No, olive oil is one of the standards in terms of how it can improve your heart health.
So let's talk about what other things that it's looking for. Like, so the role in inflammation is what we just covered there in increasing what I guess with inflammation going on. I feel like that's a hot word today. Inflammation is very hot. What is omega-3's role in? Is it keeping it under control? Is it lowering? Is it just making it a little bit more efficient?
So both omega-3s and omega-6s are involved in the inflammatory process in our body. They have 2 different pathways that they're involved in. Omega-3 fatty acids produce many more molecules and substances linked to reducing inflammation. So that is the whole thing. They produce many anti-inflammatory molecules. Omega-3s are amazing. That's the mechanism. And that's what goes on when you eat them. That's what we know without having to do like a randomized controlled trial. That is the action of omega-3s in the inflammatory process. Omega-6s produce more inflammatory molecules, which we need inflammation in the body. That's how we fight off viruses. That's how we fight off a lot of sicknesses. Like, we need that. It's so important for our immune system to function properly. So in those separate roles, is where this has spiraled so much, because it's very easy to say, oh, because these produce more inflammatory molecules, obviously if we eat more, that means we're going to have a way more inflammation. It just extrapolates into, honestly, a very sound misinterpretation. If we're talking about, okay, someone who doesn't have a background in this, doesn't understand, like, yeah, that would make sense. If they produce these inflammatory molecules, if I eat more, I'm going to have more inflammation.
It's like they're skipping, it's like jumping little spots. If we're trying to draw a sound line of story, there's a lot of blank spots in that story that makes it not make sense. It's a sound story where if you don't really understand what inflammation is in the first place, if you don't understand those words, why it would make sense. But when you actually understand the different processes, you're like, no, that's not really how it works.
It's tough because omega-3s have anti-inflammatory effects because I don't like, the names get confusing. So these inflammatory molecules, I'm not going to say the exact names, but it helps reduce those in the body. So it shifts the balance of inflammation. But just shifting that balance of inflammatory to anti-inflammatory molecules, that does the same thing. They're good for you, but that absolutely does not mean that affects inflammatory diseases. There's some research out there for its efficacy in terms of helping with inflammation related to lupus, but it's not that powerful. Like, it's just not. It's simply like cancer promotes a lot of inflammation. So just because you're eating a lot of omega-3s doesn't mean you're going to eradicate inflammation related to cancer. Just like if you eat a lot of omega-6s doesn't mean you're going to produce inflammation that causes cancer. It goes both ways.
So when we're talking now about how omega-3s promote a lot of the anti-inflammatory pieces, why would that be a good thing then in that process? Why would you want more of those? It would be like the next logical question that makes something like, oh, we need it, it's good. Why would it be beneficial to have those? Is it just kept under greater control to where your body, like, it's using inflammation optimally, like how it should be used?
It affects signaling.
Oh, okay.
It affects inflammation signaling. So again, these play a huge role in cell membranes. When you produce more, when you shift this balance towards more anti-inflammatory molecules, you have more cell signaling for anti-inflammatory processes. So that's reducing a lot of oxidation, which promotes a lot of inflammation. Omega-3s help with that. So it affects at a cellular level, it affects signaling. So there's signaling pathways that promote inflammation that these molecules produce, and there's some that reduce inflammation.
Kind of like how when people talk about like random things, like cortisol is bad. No, like you need it. Inflammation is bad. No, well, you need it under certain. So essentially these help the cell wall, every cell in your body just work a little bit more efficiently in how they're signaled and how they're received and how inflammation works in the body. Would that be a good way to sound like it makes it work more efficiently, giving your body what it needs and not extra?
It shifts that balance between signaling related to inflammation and anti-inflammatory signaling. So because you're producing more anti-inflammatory molecules on this would be on like a high omega-3 diet, pretty low to moderate omega-6, it just shifts that balance. So you're going to have more signaling pathways involved in reducing inflammation. But say if you have a disease, like if you have a chronic disease like cancer, if you already have heart disease, like it's not going to get rid of that. It may reduce a little bit of inflammation, but it's not going to have enough of an effect on the disease. Like in terms of disease outcomes, absolutely not, because there's no cause and effect for omega-3s are going to...
Okay, I guess that got me carried away a little bit because it's all, you always were going to remember things supplementing it in your diet. What effect can they actually have? Even a small change, it seems like it makes a small change in favoring anti-inflammatory over inflammatory, which if you live your life like that every day, year after year, compounds into a lot more positive than negative scenarios, but it's not like it can take out, like you said, an absolute massive event like cancer or a massive event that happens up. But when you do it, it's just pushing the needle in one direction, which if you live your life more on this side, it's like, oh, better things tend to happen, right?
Yep.
A lot. So that's its role in inflammation. Now, I don't want to jump the gun because it got me excited. The new ongoing research is at least looking at its role in mental health, in depression, and things like that. That's what kind of caught my eyes a little bit. Where is it now? Where's the research now? Because I know you said it's recent. And do you know any kind of, like, why would those two things tie into each other, omega-3 and depression or mental health?
I'm going to talk about some of the studies available first about this and its role in depression, because again, it may help reduce symptoms related to depression. I used to write for a long time. I used to write literature reviews. I used to write articles to summarize research. You have to be so careful about how you communicate findings. So I will always say may. I will always say can. I will always say that I will always make some sort of disclaimer to show you this is not a cause and effect, and this is not for everyone because it's not definitive. But it may help reduce symptoms related to depression. So there's, in the most recent meta-analyses it was around 26 randomized controlled trials looking at the role of omega-3s in major depressive disorder. So that's very different from like minor depression, like symptoms of depression. But so there's a big difference there. But this was 2,160 participants. So that's a lot of people. And overall, omega-3 supplementation, and it was in the form of fish oils, had a significant effect on reducing symptoms related to depression. And that's huge. That's huge. But then you have, and this was a these were randomized controlled trials. So again, compared with placebo. So people were taking like a sugar pill or something. They didn't know if they were receiving fish oil or not. This demonstrated clinical benefits, which is great. And this can inform a lot of research. However, it's unclear if this affects people with minor depression. Yeah. We do not know that yet. There's also not enough evidence to show that it helps with anxiety. The potential is there, but there's just not enough to say, hey, let's look at a population of people with anxiety disorders, because there's many different anxiety disorders that research is still pretty infant. So there's that's evolving. Who knows, in 10 years, it could be completely different. And this was at a dose, so they were taking EPA. It's 60% EPA is where they saw the effectiveness.
Is when you're saying the omega-3 is
remember we were talking
60-40 to EPA to DHA? Is that what that means?
Yeah, yeah. So the supplement was greater than or equal to 60%.
Was that meaning if the dosage dropped below that?
This was the meta-analyses. So on reviewing of all of these studies, the percent EPA to DHA had to be greater than or equal to 60%.
Yeah, so what I'm
EPA.
asking is, does that mean in this analysis, does that mean that they didn't notice a difference when DHA was higher than that, or that the research just wasn't done on that?
So there has been research done on lower dosages of EPA, and so what they found to be significant across the board out of all of the randomized controlled trials that have analyzed the effects of fish oil supplements on depression, in order for them to be effective, at least 6%
So
EPA.
EPA seems like it's playing a bigger role, which again, it's still in its infant stages, especially in this field, and especially with how complex this field is. But it's seeming like EPA might play a bigger role, might play one. But I think that this is the most exciting thing, I think, is at least there's a hint that, there's something going on here. There's something happening. We don't fully understand it yet.
It's informative.
Understand it yet, but that's enough to okay, let's keep digging now. Let's cut off another section of the pie that we weren't in before, and let's start analyzing this, which I think is super exciting when it comes to mental health, which
it's very fascinating. And this was before that, what we noticed when we were looking at, so observational studies, you look at populations, they're great. They are so informative, but you need that next layer of randomized control trials to see the associations if this is significant. So before these RCTs came out, researchers were noticing that people who consumed omega-3s regularly were less likely to be depressed. So just seeing those patterns, that doesn't say that, that doesn't mean that high omega-3 intake reduces depression or those who eat omega-3s aren't depressed. That's not what that's saying. It's, oh, we see this pattern here. That's interesting. Let's see if there's any association there. Let's see if this can actually be proven in a study.
Yeah, people love to inverse those kind of findings. But it's an interesting, it's kind of like a metal detector going off a little bit. If you're on the beach and a metal detector, you're like, oh, ding, ding, ding. Something happened over here. Let's start digging a little bit. Could be a paper clip.
Yeah.
Could be a gold watch. Could be, you have zero clue. Could just be a misreading. But it's like there's something there, which I think is super cool. Especially that's a really cool statistic. They looked into that a little bit, which I know you couldn't control too large for that, but that's super interesting just because it seems like in this, I know we were talking a little bit on the creatine episode, a little bit on separate episodes. It seems like there's more here on the supplementation side of things than a lot of other supplement areas, right? They're starting to dig, like this is probably a bigger focus as far as supplements involved, which, okay.
Yeah. And this review was from 2019. So it's pretty recent. Always, like, there are limitations to just studying omega-3 intake in general. Like with the same with creatine, we mentioned this before, it's very difficult to determine baseline omega-3 levels. So if you had the majority of people coming into your study who were already deficient in omega-3s, of course, giving them a fish oil supplement is going to work. And that's a huge limitation. If you are deficient in any nutrient that plays a significant role in your health, if you start supplementing with it at mega doses, of course you're going to see differences. Like that's a huge limitation to just a lot of studies in general. Like when you're creatine, you'd have to take a muscle biopsy. Like that you can't do that.
It's not,
like
you can't,
that.
It's not
You can't do that. It's really difficult.
You can't do that large.
They're getting to there are certain lipid profiles in your blood that you can look at that may determine that, okay, you should up your omega-3 intake. Let's experiment there. But we're not really there in terms of, okay, this tells you are deficient in omega-3. You have to rely on these people's dietary patterns, which of course self-report is so flawed, but that's nutrition science research. There are flaws.
But it's not like it's completely useless because of that. There's a lot of applications.
Yeah, it does. Oh my goodness.
That's how we're so far today.
Yeah.
In where we are with this. So I know this is going to be a big piece. Because before, I know people are starting to wonder, like, okay, well, crap, how do I need to take fish oil? How do I take it? But before, I know a lot of the stuff that I think we haven't touched more on, like the effect that it has on heart health and what that actually means. Because I know that's what it's prescribed. But we talked about inflammation. We talked about looks like it's like fresh kind of things looking into its role in depression or in mental health. So when it comes to heart health, what kind of things do you see? Do you have any statistics to match it with? This is why it's predominantly used, or at least prescribed or said for heart health. Why is that a big area of focus? Is that where the largest body of research is? Is that where we're seeing the most effect? What's going on there?
Yeah. So I'll answer all of these questions kind of piecewise. I want to start out what can be helpful here is going back decades and decades ago, researchers noticed that fish eating populations, communities, groups of people had very, very, very low rates of heart disease. And so, like, picking up on those patterns, what is that? And that is the basis of how a lot of this came to be, is noticing those patterns. Patterns are so important, and epidemiologists, like, are pivotal for us understanding nutrition science research and informing it. So picking up on this, I just think I think it's really cool to me. Maybe it's just me, like how that evolves.
I think people underestimate it sometimes because, like, it's easy to say, like, oh yeah, obviously that makes sense, higher fish eating population. But before that was a known stat, before anyone looked at that, it's like,
we didn't know.
It takes so much, as far as intelligent individuals, like the amount of work that probably went into even just starting to notice small patterns like that, or just even to ask that question in the first place, it's so understated. So it's like, that happened decades ago. So I think people are like, oh yeah, of course, we know that nowadays. It's like, don't underestimate how cool that is. Like how cool that is. Yeah.
So there have been multiple studies. So I'm going to include a few meta-analyses here, but later this was all like this observation was associated with omega-3 consumption. So there have been many recent updated meta-analyses looking at randomized controlled trials of the effects of omega-3 consumption on people who already have cardiovascular disease or are at risk for cardiovascular disease. So looking at it with people, and this is where I think it's extremely significant. You're looking at people at risk or already have it. There's something we can do, like a nutrition intervention that may help this. Okay, let's look at that. So there were, in this 8,000 patients in this one study, it's called the REDUCE-IT trial. That's like the shortened version of it that I'm going to use. 8,000 patients with elevated cardiovascular disease risk and high blood triglyceride levels. Half of them received 2 grams of pure EPA. Pure EPA. Again, we were talking about that EPA to DHA, like so no DHA.
Pure EPA, which is found in. Okay.
Yeah. And 2 grams of it, not milligrams, grams.
That's a lot. For everybody, that's
the other
lot.
half, the other half received a placebo. And is it called Vasepa? I think I'm pronouncing that wrong, but I'm just going to say pure EPA. Nice. It significantly reduced blood triglyceride levels and reduced the number of heart attacks and strokes, the need for heart stenting procedures to open up clogged arteries, and death.
So they noticed the group that you're saying,
Huge.
that had the 2 milligrams of EPA every day, noticed a significant reduction in all of, not just some, but like all of those levels that you just said: heart attacks, strokes, the need for heart stenting procedures in the first place, death, like all these things.
Yeah. And this is an RCT. This is 8,000 people. This isn't the meta-analyses yet. I haven't even mentioned that.
That's massive for an RCT.
So, yeah. So then there was another study that later came out. This was huge, but it started to get called into question because of this other study that's called the STRENGTH trial. 13,000 patients received a different formulation of omega-3 fish oil, a combination of EPA and DHA, to see if it would also reduce cardiovascular disease risk. And so they received either that fish oil supplement, which is a combination, or a placebo. The trial was terminated early due to an interim analysis revealing no differences between the two groups.
I got questions. Because that sounds like big. So the first study, the pure EPA dose, we noticed all that crazy things that happened.
Yep.
Positive things. This meta-analysis, was it a meta-analysis, you said, over how many studies?
No, this was another trial.
So
there were some smaller studies kind of showing, hey, maybe the form actually matters. Some smaller scale studies that were like EPA, DHA isn't showing the same effect as this huge study. So then another trial, another RCT came out
with 13,000 people. Was it, and when it was EPA, DHA, when that trial, did you say, like, was it equal dose, like 50-50 EPA, DHA, or was it just a pill?
It was an EPA, DHA combination. Yeah, so it was like,
we're not noticing any difference.
Yeah. And that's telling. Like, they terminate, and so many trials are terminated. Oh my goodness. So many for so many reasons. But like, it simply wasn't working. It doesn't mean that there were issues in the beginning. Like, this was ongoing, but it can, like, you're monitoring these people, checking their level. Like, there were no differences. So they're not going to continue because, one, you have these patients and they're enrolled, and also the cost of doing that. Like, it was telling enough for them.
This is just not, and that's a bit, 13, this is not 30 people. This is not this is 13,000 patients. That leaves just a ton of questions of, like, okay, like, what is, so is it fish oil? Is it omega-3? Or is it just EPA? What's the...
So a more recent, now we'll get into this meta-analyses of, this was done, where can I see the date of it? 2019. So an updated meta-analysis of 13 randomized controlled trials involving 127,477 participants. So this is an updated review of marine omega-3 supplementation and cardiovascular disease. And it included data, from 13 RCTs, and found fish oil omega-3 supplementation, high concentration of EPA. So a high concentration or almost pure, lowered risk factors for heart attack and death from coronary heart disease. So those risk factors, like we were talking about, high blood triglyceride levels and high blood pressure. So it has been studied more, and also like it has been shown, okay, we do see patterns with the high EPA dosage being effective. It is effective. When we have the combination of EPA and DHA, that it's not the same. You don't see the same. And again, these are patients. These are patients with the risk factors for cardiovascular disease already. So the dosage is going to be much higher. This is not going to be the same thing for a healthy individual who doesn't have any risk factors of cardiovascular disease. Like an EPA DHA supplement is good for you to meet your recommendations. It's that is definitely very different, but you do need a much higher dose and a more pure form of EPA if you do have.
But now I'm even looking at this, like it almost makes you question. I don't even think we probably have you probably don't have an answer for this, but I'm like, since it was a combination, it's like they were still getting EPA in that large strength trial with 13,000. Like they were still getting EPA. That almost leaves my brain just wants to jump a bridge, not pay any attention to what's underneath, but the bridge it wants to jump is like, well, is it possible that the DHA is canceling out any effect that the EPA might have? Like, is just the DHA present?
No.
Because then I guess my question there would be, why didn't out of the 13,000 participants, they were still getting EPA? Why weren't they noticing any of the positive effects that the other groups were, that were also getting EPA, just without the DHA part?
Yeah, so it what this tells you, and seeing, again, it hasn't been, we really need to, and this, I think there are some ongoing studies right now, like comparing just EPA to just DHA. Like, again, this is still pretty novel. Like, we still need studies to compare, like, EPA and just DHA. This was compared to a combination, so we don't have that yet. But what this says is it's informative for healthcare professionals to see, okay, I have a patient who has some risk factors for cardiovascular disease, recommending a more higher concentration of EPA supplement and also a higher dose. That in the research is what has been shown to be effective. There's no like adverse effects of taking a mixed one. It's just, it's not enough to have an effect on these risk factors.
Okay, so I'm really excited then for like the next like 10, 15, 20 years of what we start to understand. Because it seems like there's a big possibility here once we start to really better understand the mechanisms that are behind, especially separating these two pieces of it. That's interesting.
Yeah. So it is DHA accounts for 40% of the polyunsaturated fatty acids in your brain. So, and 60% in the retina of your eye, which is interesting. So I don't know, like, again, that I don't know why that is. Why, like, EPA shows a much, much stronger effect, and maybe it's because of the composition in the polyunsaturated fatty acids. But
when anything shows an effect just like, on heart disease, on cardio, like that's not like even if there's something there, like that's
and these
big. Like not many things do that. Like not many things exist that do that. So what we're kind of
it can produce like a major reduction in triglycerides. It's found anywhere from 15 to 30%. That's the most significant findings you'll have across the board in terms of patients with risk factors for cardiovascular disease. That is what is the most significant. Like that is huge. It also can reduce blood pressure in those with high blood pressure. It can raise good cholesterol levels. If you've ever heard of like the good HDL cholesterols, help prevent plaque buildup. But for different people with, like, this is different for a healthy individual versus someone who already has these risk factors, already has cardiovascular disease. That's why the dosage you definitely have to, obviously, I'm not a doctor, like not a doctor, not prescribing anyone here, just reviewing and communicating the research out there, but definitely worth having a conversation with your practitioner about fish oil if you do have any of these markers and it's never even been brought up to you. Of course, there may be reasons for that, but.
And then I guess the questions, I know we were talking about this a little bit, but the questions that I would have following that, right, listening to this is, like, when you're talking about how much, it seems like a lot of these trials have had a very large window of how much these individuals are actually taking of each one. And I think this is just important because it was brought to mind. I mean, this was years ago when I was looking into fish oil from, the tip of the iceberg of what you have. That's even an understatement. The tip of the, but when I was looking into it, it's like the EPA and DHA content is still extremely widely varied in just a fish oil supplement. You could be getting as little as 100 milligrams, upwards of 3,000 milligrams in a supplement. It seems like I know we're not understanding too much about fish oil right now, but we know there's something there. Is that pretty accurate? It's like there's a large window.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, like this study had 250 milligrams. This one had 4,000, right? It's like, that's a big window to say, okay, like, take some fish oil. It's like, well, how much? It's like, should I have this much or 10 times that much over here? I think that's, and I think what you're saying, right, is the recommendations, it's almost impossible to give. At least you can't just say to everybody, obviously. And that's why it's probably more important to work with a healthcare professional you trust and that communicates this well. So they can look and see what's best for you to be taking.
Yeah, so for the general person, general healthy person, the range is, it's recommended between 250 milligrams and 500 milligrams of combined EPA and DHA. But then when you look at the research, it is between the recommendation, like based off of that for anyone, it's between 250 milligrams and 4,000
So right
milligrams. So it's like
who's the recommendation from the initial one, the 250 to 500 milligrams? So the American Heart Association says this, but in the research, it's like there could be more application at a higher dose. We don't know, but that's the minimum dose. So like that's the recommended minimum, 250 to 500. So then they can, like, from your diet, recommend upwards of like 1 gram per day. So it's very, you say minimum, that's saving everyone's ass. You know what I mean? Because it's like, you don't know that's the tough thing with population-based recommendations is like, oh, but it depends. But it depends. Everything,
like, it really, really does. And that's why it's so important. Like, I just wish that this was like topics like this were a huge focus in medical schools. Like, most medical doctors are not required to take a single nutrition course. And like, that is something I'm just so passionate about. It's like just like
I'm just absolutely floored by that.
And there's some programs that do, but they're few and far between. And that's why you're seeing a lot more, what are they called? I used to have one, like functional medicine doctors, and there's pros and cons to each. I personal opinion, huge believer in having a mix of both Eastern and Western medicine. It's so important. Here I am talking about supplements. So many people think I'm like just pushing for the FDA and the government because I care about research. And I'm like,
I feel like a lot of times people think like Eastern medicine, they think, okay, that's foods, whatever. It almost like discredits it all, but it's like there's a lot of flaws in Western medicine, a lot of flaws, like, and built from the base.
Oh my God.
Built from the base, and that's what like always annoys me of people. It's like, oh, carnivore, whoever, like, oh, they've got a PhD. Whatever comes out of their mouth is fact. That's why it's important to look at people who have a wide scope, who continue to explore, to look at all these different things. There's a lot of flaws, a lot of holes in, I mean, both in Eastern and Western. There's a lot of flaws in both. But it's mind blowing, and I can't wait. I wish this was more explored like decades ago, so we could have the answers now instead of the answers that we're probably going to have.
We have so many. It's just like, it is ongoing, and like there is a vast amount of studies that show that it can really improve heart health across the board. Like, that's huge. And we're talking about application here, like recommendations for dosage. First, always start with food. Like, this, it's our MO, like across the board, whenever we're talking about supplements, like, yes, amazing that fish oil can have this effect, omega-3 supplements.
Yeah. Don't
First,
just run
look
the
at your diet.
GNC. Don't just
See
run the
where
GNC.
you're getting it. Yeah. Yeah. Because there's also so many other health benefits of eating salmon. Like the nutrition in salmon is incredible. There are ways so that you don't have to take a really, really high dose of fish oil. Like maybe you're getting a good serving of omega-3s in at least one meal a day. Okay, maybe I'm going to look into taking some fish oil, but always start with lifestyle and dietary factors first before you're considering a supplement, and discuss it with your doctor. But again, it is the foods we were mentioning that are high in omega-3s are typically more expensive. Omega-3 supplements, high dosage, typically more expensive. What is really cheap? Ultra-processed foods. Yeah. What are they high in? Omega-6s. There are so many different levels to, like, yes, this is so fascinating, but why is this still persisting if we know it? Like, why are people still not eating enough omega-3s in America? There are so many layers to it, and I am fully aware that some people just don't have access to these foods, and that's just one piece of the puzzle. So if you don't have access to foods high in omega-3s, what are those foods also high in? Like fiber, antioxidants. Yeah. And then that's why I get so frustrated when people will say that certain foods are inflammatory, killing you, causing cancer, because the average person who that is the majority of their diet has a choice for some things, but when it comes to food access, choice, it's very, like, people underestimate how little choice a lot of people
usually
have.
Usually the ones saying it are, like we said, I forget which episode it was, but usually the ones who are saying those kind of just audacious things are the people who live in massive cities, who have a higher income, who, all these things, they forget about the dead zones in America for availability. They forget about how everyone's not living like, again, to eat salmon multiple times a week, that's expensive. Salmon's not a cheap.
I went to the store 2 days ago to buy half of a pound of salmon for myself, which I would eat less than that. It would probably half of a pound of salmon was $14.99. I put it right back. I didn't get it.
Like, it's beef, high fat, like extremely low quality beef. You could get a pound for $1.99. Like, it's not as easy as like, oh, I'll just start eating salmon 3 to 4 times a week and add all these good foods.
That's why I typically, like, I'll always show an option for, like, chia seeds that you can buy on Amazon in bulk, like, spread out, like, how many servings you can get from them. I think, like, a pound of chia seeds you get for, like, $9.99 on Amazon. And that lasts like a pound. Like, that lasts you a long, long time.
Freaking bucket.
So, like, I always try to include that recommendation, too.
It's worth looking into where you are getting it or are not getting it in your diet first. It's worth paying attention to, obviously, if it's having massive impact on these areas. It's not like we're talking about, oh, it'll make your bench press go up by 3 pounds. It's like, oh, this could help play a role in preventing heart disease. This is going to be big in the future.
Yeah, it can help over time.
So it's worth paying attention to in your diet. Okay, where am I getting? Yeah. And then I think just, you could say this instead of say, oh, just increase it in your diet. Maybe instead of that, we could say, okay, look at your diet and see if and where there's possibility to improve. Not saying, okay, increase your dietary omega-3 to 500 milligrams a day. For some people, that's impossible. But if you could find small tweaks where you can add a little bit, and then potentially look at a supplement after that to fill any other gaps, because that's usually what supplements are just for, is to fill in, like, nutrient gaps in your diet. But look at where you can realistically improve first in your diet. Look at omega-3. I always think it's important to look at the actual label of the omega-3 supplement you're buying, because, like you said, like, the ones that are like $4.99 at the mart down the street, they might have 3 or 4 grams of fat, but then you look at the EPA DHA content and it's 50 to 100 milligrams total, or something that wouldn't make a difference, where the higher dosed ones could cost $30, $40 sometimes. But look at the actual dose, look at where you're getting, explore dietary options. I think even young people, it's worth talking to a healthcare professional next time you're in a doctor's visit. If you don't have these problems, I still think it's worth exploring. Do you?
Yeah. I mean, and then that's also, like, I am such a huge supporter of getting your blood work done. Like, so many people don't. And I totally recognize that, oh my, it's so rare that I went to a primary care doctor growing up where blood work was routine. That's not routine. Did not grow up with that. It's also most healthcare companies don't cover the majority of, like, it will do like a short blood panel that's not very informative, or won't even cover getting your blood work done if you don't have a reason to. So if you don't have these risk factors, if you seem healthy, your health insurance will not cover
my health insurance
getting your blood work
almost
done.
didn't cover it when I was
that
getting
drives me
diagnosed with
crazy.
type 1 diabetes. There was like an issue. It was like an issue. It was actually would just stick a little bit. I'm like, what? Give me a freaking blood test. See what's going on inside my body. No, that's not.
Yeah.
And I think it's in companies like the previous that you worked for, right? It's becoming more normalized, which I'm freaking pumped for. And I think that's.
Yeah. Inside Tracker is a company, and again, it's on the expensive side, but it's also worth it. And if your insurance didn't, like, what you get from it, so you get a full blood panel of over like 43 different biomarkers, you get recommendations from registered dietitians and researchers with their PhD on how to improve those biomarkers, supplements, food, it's their food first, lifestyle interventions. And so, like, you don't just get, okay, here are your results, what do I do with them? So I think, yes, it's expensive, but what you get, it's not like any different from if you didn't get a full blood panel covered, but you also get, okay, how can I improve these? How can I fix them? So
it's expensive. It's expensive now. Like, blood testing across the board is usually pretty expensive now. Like, now, since they believe me, I have type 1 diabetes. Now I get blood work covered every 3 months, which I'm like, that's a blessing just from having type 1. I'm like, no one else, like, it's very hard to get like insurance covered blood work done every 3 months. But I think it's the things that start expensive have to start expensive. You can't just start out doing these massively complicated tests just for cheap. This is going to be a dumb analogy, but when I think space travel, and they're selling like a ticket to space, right? When the first car goes in like 2023 for like $1 billion, and people are like, oh, it's only for the rich, it's only for this. It has to start like that, and the more money that we can get in, the better we can make it more widely available to more people. I think, and this is just an opinion of where we're heading, I think in 10 to 20 years, blood work is going to be one of the focuses for primary care all around. Like, it's going to be covered for. You don't think this is going that way?
I don't agree. I disagree. Because this has been known forever. This is how health insurance companies keep making money in the US. It will never happen.
I would bet against that.
Never happen.
I bet against that. Because I think the more private label companies, but
look at Europe.
But like, look at more private label companies.
You don't have to pay to get blood work.
Like Inside Tracker. Those weren't around that long ago. More and more companies are doing that, which is going to make the cost cheaper and cheaper and cheaper.
Oh, yeah. I don't think it's going to ever become routine in our healthcare system, though, in the U.S., though. No. I think there's going to be more resources to have it more readily available. If you don't have healthcare to cover it, I don't think
I can see, but I can see it being a staple in individuals' life when they start to realize what the possibilities are with that, the benefits that you do see doing this opposed to just general care, which I think a lot of people, like growing up, my primary care I stopped going to my primary care physician a long time ago because I got nothing but like a bill. Like, I would ask questions, I do this, but I got no answers, no nothing. I was like, I need specialized care. So I think the more companies that start to do this, the more people realize, like, holy crap, this is changing lives when people can actually have access to this. It gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper until I think more people can do it. I think in a decade or two, it's going to be more uncommon for you not to get your routine blood work done than it is common.
I think so too, but I still think that there's going to be huge disparities in terms of who gets that.
You know what we should do?
I don't think that's going to change.
We should tear down healthcare in America. We should pivot. We should pivot our mission.
Oh my God.
Tear down the healthcare system in America.
Yeah.
Let's pivot.
Yeah, you're talking to the person who literally just got denied their medication because of my healthcare. Like, it's insane. I can go over insulin costs. Simply insane.
Like, a pen of my Novolog costs, I think, $1.58 to manufacture, and to buy 5 pens, I think it's like $900. And like the cost, it's the most. Yeah.
My body can't do it. I cannot do it. Why are you making me pay for it?
It's not like it's not special. I will die if I do not use this insulin. But that's another. That would actually be a fun one if we got. That's a future episode idea. But is there anything to wrap tie bow on this for fish oil that you want to put everything on?
No, I'm happy we sprinkled the vegetable oil and seed oil throughout. I'm very happy with how that worked out because that was a good precursor to what's to come. But this was really like one of our episodes where like diving deep into the research, like what this could possibly mean for you. Are fish oil supplements sound? Is there truly an effect? Short answer, yes, absolutely. Go before taking any supplement at all, discuss it with your doctor, see what may be the right dose for you. Look at your dietary patterns, look at your lifestyle patterns always first, because those are the most impactful when it comes to your health. A fish oil supplement could be that piece to help you go the extra mile, or help you even get omega-3s into your diet if you don't have access to them. But I'm telling you, in 5 to 10 years, there's going to be even more. And the impact of omega-3s, I think we're going to find out, are even more impactful than we think.
I'm not missing a daily dose, and I'm adding more chia seeds. That's what I got done today. But that's beautiful. I like these deep dives. I think we should do more of them. I think they're fun.
Me too.
That was fun. Thank you all for listening. I hope you learned something today. We appreciate everyone who has and already. And if you haven't, you should be running to that ratings button. Hit 5 stars for us. We greatly appreciate it, all this time and effort we put into building the episodes. But thank you so much for subscribing. If you're not on our socials, you know where to find us. fs.pod on TikTok, on Instagram, fitness stuff for normal people on YouTube. If that's where you like to consume your content, hit that bell. Like, subscribe. Keep doing your thing. Did I forget something? Yes.
We love you.
We love you so much. All right. We'll talk to y'all soon.
And that was perfect.
Have a productive rest of your day or evening.